Good morning, everybody. My name is Paul Edey, and I'm going to be talking to you this morning about giving effective feedback and giving feedback that is sometimes critical. I think in schools, we're not all that good at giving feedback. We miss opportunities to do it, and we build it up and store it up and wait until that end of year appraisal or end of year chat, which is high stakes. And I think that's a big mistake. So giving feedback needs to be done spontaneously. It needs to be thoughtful. So the purpose of feedback, why do we need feedback? I think we all need to know how we're doing. And by receiving feedback that is open, honest, we can improve our performance, our ability and career. We also will learn how to moderate our behavior and develop new knowledge and skills. And through feedback, a virtuous loop is created where the feedback is given, you take the feedback away with you, you reflect upon it, and it results in a change in behavior. Now, in the school context, there is continuous learning and feedback. I mean, as a teacher, we are continuously giving feedback to our pupils. And yet somehow when it comes to our colleagues and staff, we don't give effective feedback. And it's very important that the head and the HOD set the example. Is there a culture of giving feedback in your school? How receptive are you to feedback? And in order to give effective feedback, it needs to be consistent. It can't be a one-off thing that is delivered when you're angry or when you're reacting to something. You also need to set clear expectations about how feedback is used in your school. What is your school climate like? What is the leadership like? Are they receptive to feedback? Do they listen to feedback? And then you need to link that feedback to what KPIs are set. So at the end of the year, when you're having a formal feedback session, and as I always used to say to my staff, don't wait to build everything up into the end of year package, because then it becomes high stakes. People are nervous about it. They see this feedback or an appraisal or performance management interview as a high stakes thing, which is going to determine salary or bonus or which classes they're going to teach next year. So it needs to be linked to clearly defined key performance indicators. Of course, if you are working in an environment which is low on trust and where people are really critical of each other and seldom give honest feedback, then it is that sort of environment is not going to be an environment which is conducive to honest, open feedback. And it's really important that this is done correctly, because if feedback is delivered incorrectly, it can result in a really alienated teacher, someone who is demoralized, diminished by that feedback. So the setting is important. You know, if you look at the culture of your school, how would you describe the culture of your school? Hargreaves and Fullen talk about the way we do things around here. And if you take a look at this rather terrifying photograph of this old-fashioned classroom with the teacher standing there in his academic gown and this little boy in front of the class working out the sums, and the teacher standing there with a cane, one wonders how much further we've moved on in the culture of our classrooms. Is the culture hierarchical? Is it critical? How much of a growth mindset is there in your school? How much is collaborative? Do you retire into your classroom and seldom share? And it's really important in the context of feedback to have a growth mindset as part of the school's culture so that you are collaborative, you're working together. I go back to the leadership of your school. If you take a look at the leadership, is it inclusive? Is there leadership at every level of the school? Or do you have to have a title in order to lead? How much vision is there? Does the head make the vision clear? Are the HODs involved and the senior management team involved in setting that vision? In terms of confidence, does your HOD or your head manage by ambush, or are they confident that you are able to deliver, to be given a responsibility, to have your KPIs set, and to carry them out? Management is a privilege. It's to try and get the best out of people, not to manage by ambush. Manage by encouraging. Does your school have a clear strategy? What is it? Do you know what it is? And are you all aligned in trying to bring about that strategy? And I go back to the emphasis on teamwork. Is there a sense of team? Or are there subcultures within the school that are toxic or alien to the culture of the school? Who sets the culture in your school? Is it the people who are brassed off and alienated? Or does the culture come from the top, clearly defined, strong leadership, and a sense that everybody's involved in the making of decisions and in the teamwork? Now, there are obviously many different types of feedback. Often spontaneous feedback is so helpful because it sets a relationship as a manager or as a leader, an HOD, a deputy, or a head. Try to find occasions where you see someone doing things that are right rather than looking for things that are wrong. So you give the feedback, it's spontaneous, it's off the cuff, it's genuine, and it's direct. So I really enjoyed your production of the play this evening. It was inspiring. It lifted the mood. Congratulations. As I said, don't make feedback a once-off, heavily loaded event. Feedback's got to be regular. You will have reports if you're a head or an HOD. You will have people in your team. How regularly are you meeting and giving that feedback? Or are you just ignoring them? That feedback has to be regular, and perhaps you need to set up a regular time to give feedback to your team. Performance reviews, a very contentious thing in schools, often done really badly, high stakes, usually a one-way transfer of information. You've got to remember that the person being reviewed is often extremely nervous. And so if you've given regular spontaneous feedback during the course of the year, that performance review should go far more easily than if it's a once-off high stakes event. Some schools use 360-degree surveys. I've used them in schools, and unless they are developmental, unless they are done to develop and to try and improve your career, your performance, rather than being a critical thing where you are nailed on certain items, then they can be used very, very badly. I'm not sure about psychometric tests. Some of you will have gone for positions of seniority and you will have had psychometric tests. I think they're useful, but I don't think that you should allow a psychometric test to determine who you are and entirely what your strengths and weaknesses are. Remember when giving feedback that it's got to be done in an empathetic way. If you are giving it when you're angry, I came across an acronym, HALT. When you don't give feedback when you're hungry, when you're angry, when you're lonely, and when you're tired. And this wonderful quote by the Persian poet Rumi, raise your words, not your voice. It's the rain that grows flowers, not thunder, I think is really powerful. The do's. I think you go into a feedback session without having done the necessary preparation at your peril. You've got to prepare thoroughly. You've got to know the person you're talking to. It cannot come across as something that you've just prepared when you don't really know the person. You haven't made an attempt to get to know the person during the course of the year. You've got to be prepared. You've got to know about them. You've got to know what their interests are, what makes them tick, what their strengths are. In other words, you've got to have established a relationship. You can't give feedback to someone if you don't have a relationship. Be confident, give the feedback, and be careful not to base your feedback on the odd, vague observation. You've got to cite facts, you've got to give specific instances, but not just one-off incidents that have happened. Obviously, you must be respectful. You cannot go in there, no one expects you to like everybody in your team, but at least you've got to treat everybody fairly. And so be respectful. Comment on their behavior and not their character. Focus. Make eye contact. Now, obviously, there's a cultural thing here. Focus, make eye contact. In some Black cultures, in people in a position less senior, avoid eye contact. Be aware of that. So just always be aware of those cultural differences in giving the feedback. As I've mentioned, don't give feedback when you're angry, and don't get sidetracked. I think as teachers, we're not all that good at dealing with adults. We spend our life dealing with children. And when you give feedback, don't go all over the place. You've got something important to say, and the person on the receiving end knows that there's something coming. Whatever you do, don't wait after half an hour of beating around the bush with woolly comments and then come in with what you're going to deliver and deliver it as the sort of coup de grace. So be focused, be on task, and don't get sidetracked. Don't be defensive. So often, whilst you are listening, hopefully you're listening, and we're going to have a couple of slides on that just now. Don't be defensive. If the person starts getting upset by the feedback that you're giving, don't become defensive. And perhaps it's better if that's the case, if the person's becoming defensive or angry, to stop the feedback, to say, look, let's come back on a different day and try this again. I've clearly upset you by some of the things that I've said. Don't attack the person. As I said, we've all got people that we like in our organization, and often people that mirror what we like. So, you know, you've got a great sense of humor. I really like that. Often means that you enjoy their sense of humor because it's similar to yours. So don't attack the person, stick to the facts, and listen. Now, Dilbert has some wonderful cartoons on management and leadership. Just have a look at this cartoon and absorb what is being said here. You've got the leader saying, how are you doing on your unspoken objectives? My what? I'm referring to the goals I have in my mind that I never mention. So often we have expectations of people. We haven't made our vision clear. We haven't made our objectives clear. And we sort of practice mushroom management, where our staff are kept in the dark. We cover them in layers of manure, and when they stick their heads up, their head gets cut off. So the leader here, very obtuse, hasn't given these objectives to the employee. How are those going? And the employee replies, I'm totally nailing them. In other words, completely ignorant of what those goals are, what those objectives are, but giving them back to the boss because the boss is not going to be listening anyway. So often as leaders, as HODs, senior management, as heads, we tend to not be great listeners. We interrupt, we preempt what people are saying, we fill in the spaces, and listening is absolutely critical. I used to work for a very impressive head, but he often used to say to me, I hear you. Now, I don't think I hear you is the same as listening. Listening really requires skill. It requires working on. And we can all acquire better listening skills. Sit comfortably, try not to put a desk between you and the person. And sit comfortably, don't be defensive in your body language, don't cross your arms, don't sit with your arms folded across your chest, and lean forwards slightly. Make eye contact with the person and pay attention. Don't be thinking how you're going to respond to what they're saying all the time. Lean forward, make the eye contact, pay attention, listen carefully. As I say, don't try to preempt and have the answer formulating in your mind while the person's speaking, because it means you're not listening. Relax, show interest, listen actively, smile, and enjoy what they're giving back to you. You'll find lots of these acronyms on listening. We've got another one, listen, an acronym here, and it repeats what I've said quite a lot, but look interested, get interested, remain interested. Involve yourself by responding once the person is finished. So make sure that you're on task and listening, and say, can I just check that that's correct? I didn't quite understand what you were saying there. Would you like to just confirm that what I heard is what you meant? Test your understanding. Evaluate the message, and then neutralize your feelings. Don't get angry. Don't get worked up. Just listen and try and be neutral and receive that feedback, which is a two-way street. If you're doing all the talking, then there's a real issue in giving that feedback. So just to sum up this feedback process, in order to have a successful feedback with your colleagues, the people that you work with in your school. So you agree on a time and space and place. Sometimes perhaps not your office. Perhaps go and meet in the other person's office. Perhaps meet in their classroom if you want to give some feedback. They must know what's going to be discussed. It's that you don't want an ambush here. Self-assessment. If you have a practice of using self-assessment in your school, give the person the opportunity to present that self-assessment. How do they feel about their performance? How are they doing? Sadly, I've noticed that often the worst performers in a school rate themselves very highly, and your best performers tend to give themselves more modest ratings. That becomes quite difficult, because it's quite difficult arguing with someone who has given themselves a really high rating. We've discussed listening. Go through that cycle that you see here, listen attentively, be engaged, and then have a discussion. It cannot be a one-way street. Check that the person you've given the feedback to has understood what it's about? Is it developmental? Are you giving praise? We all know that in that emotional bank account that you need to build up credit. You need to give that praise more often than you give criticism. And don't go into any of these discussions with a mindset that you're going to nail someone, because that is simply not going to work. You're going to alienate them, and you're going to have a brassed off member of your team. Summarize the outcomes. So what we've agreed on here is the following. You're going to go away and think about it. We're going to write it up. We're going to record what we've put down, and we're going to agree on what the next steps are. And we're going to set a time for follow-up, and then the cycle begins again. It cannot just end once off, end of the year. You have a high stakes conversation. You give the feedback. It's not recorded. It's not written down. The person has only heard the criticism in the last 5 minutes of the conversation, and they walk out of your office or out of their office feeling really diminished. That is not effective feedback. I thought this was useful. We respond to conflict differently, and you can go onto this website, and it will take you through how you respond to conflict. And it's very useful. What are your trigger points? What are the things that really spark you? And have a look at this, because I think it gives some very, very useful feedback on how you respond to conflict. And it'll help you in these conversations, sometimes these difficult conversations. And just to end off on a lighter note, many of you will be familiar with the work of Larson, the famous cartoonist, the boss obviously on the left. I'd like to know how you've taken this report and simplified it down to blank sheets of paper and the look of absolute astonishment on the recipient's face. Good luck with your feedback. We can only grow as people and organizations and as schools if we give feedback. We all benefit from feedback, but it needs to be done in a way that is carefully thought through and delivered in the sort of way that you would like to receive feedback from someone else. Good luck, and thank you. Please go on to the Think Teacher website, look at the webinars. There's some really useful things to help you there. Some on well-being, some on professional practice, but we're going to be building up a whole lot of these webinars so that to help you in your career and to make you a better teacher, a better manager, and to feel better about yourself in what is the most wonderful profession.